In this video, we're going to talk about functions of the nervous system. We learned earlier that the nervous system is the master control and communicating center of your body, and that the cells of our nervous system can communicate around your body with electrical and chemical signals that are both rapid and specific, because these electrical signals can travel very quickly, like up to 300 feet per second, and they're specific because there's nerves that attach to very specific cells within organs of your body. Now, because it's rapid, it usually causes almost an immediate response. Now, the nervous system has three overlapping functions that are all interrelated. We have sensory input, which goes to the brain for integration, and then we have processing and interpretation of that information, which then goes out to motor output. We call this efferent output because it goes to effector organs, which include things like muscles and glands. So just to summarize this pathway, remember we have sensory input. Sensory input is where we have receptors somewhere in our body, like in the retina of your eye. We have photoreceptors that can pick up light. That information is sent to the brain, where your brain can process and integrate that information. So we might interpret that glass as being a glass full of water. And then with that information, then we can integrate that to form a decision, and that decision could lead to a motor output. So then your brain can communicate with the appropriate nerves that then stimulate the proper muscles that allow you to maybe raise that glass and take a drink of water. And so in a very basic way, our nervous system functions like this, where you have sensory input, integration within the brain and spinal cord, and then motor output to a muscle or gland somewhere in the body. Now, we can divide the nervous system into two principal parts. Structurally, the nervous system has a central and peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system is your brain and spinal cord, contained within the dorsal body cavity. And we think of the central nervous system as like the integration and control center, where interpretation of sensory input can help dictate the appropriate motor output. And this type of processing can be either conscious or unconscious, but it's still an integration and control center of your body. Now, the peripheral nervous system is the portion of your nervous system outside of the central nervous system. So basically everything else that's made of nerves that's attached to your brain and spinal cord is part of the PNS, or peripheral nervous system. And that includes both spinal nerves and cranial nerves. They're called spinal nerves because they originate from the spinal cord, and cranial nerves because they come from the brain. So just to summarize this, remember your brain and spinal cord are located within the dorsal body cavity, and this is what makes up your central nervous system. And then all of these yellow nerves that are attached are part of the peripheral nervous system, which is involved with communicating information, whether that information is motor or sensory or even both. So in terms of functionally, the nervous system can be divided into sensory and motor divisions. Remember, structurally we had a central and peripheral nervous system, but functionally we have sensory or afferent division and motor or efferent division. Now, often nerves carry a mix of both, but it's important to have these distinctions because it tells you which way the information is going and where it came from. So if it's sensory or afferent information, this is information that's coming from somatic sensory fibers, which relay information from your skin, muscles, joints, and visceral sensory fibers that actually relay information from your organs. And both of these pathways here, somatic and visceral sensory pathways, which are afferent, bring information towards the central nervous system. That's why we use the word afferent, because afferent means going to the central nervous system. So for instance, a somatic sensory fiber from your skin is going to relay touch information towards the brain, where you can interpret that as, hey, there's a mosquito on my skin. Now, the motor or efferent division is basically what transmit impulses from the central nervous system, like away from the brain and spinal cord, out to effector organs like muscles and glands. And there's two major subdivisions. We got the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. Now, the somatic nervous system is what transmits motor impulses to skeletal muscle, and the autonomic nervous system is what transmits motor impulses to the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands around your body. So the somatic nervous system is basically what conducts, they're basically nerve fibers that conduct information from your brain and spinal cord out to skeletal muscle. We think of the somatic nervous system as the voluntary nervous system because it's under conscious control. Now, it's not that these nerves are particularly special, it's just that the somatic nervous system links up with a part of your brain that's under voluntary or conscious control, and so therefore it controls skeletal muscles, with volition or consciousness. Now, the autonomic nervous system consists of visceral motor fibers, and it regulates things like smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. We think of this as being an involuntary portion of your nervous system because it links up with parts of the brain that are under involuntary or subconscious control. We can divide the autonomic nervous system into two key subdivisions. We have the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, and these are actually antagonistic and therefore work in opposition to each other. So the sympathetic nervous system is going to do one thing to an organ, while the parasympathetic nervous system is going to do another. Now, just to kind of summarize this whole structure here, remember, structurally, we said there's a central and peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made of your brain and spinal cord, but functionally acts as the integrative and control center. Think of this as like the computer or the processing center for your brain. Now, it receives afferent information from the peripheral nervous system and then transmits efferent information towards the peripheral nervous system as well. So your peripheral nervous system intimately links with the central. However, the peripheral is made of all of the associated nerves, whether it's cranial nerves or spinal nerves. And these communicate basically information between the rest of your body and the brain and vice versa. Now we can divide the peripheral nervous system into two key subdivisions. We got the sensory or afferent division and the motor or efferent division. The sensory division is what basically transmits either somatic sensory or visceral sensory fibers, and it basically brings information towards the central nervous system for integration, processing, and decision making and planning. Now, and that can actually be both conscious and unconscious. Now, the efferent or motor division here is what's basically going to transmit information out to muscle and glands of your body, and we can divide this into two key categories. We have the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Remember, somatic is voluntary and it conducts, or conscious, and it conducts information towards skeletal muscle. So your skeletal muscles are under conscious control because they're connected by a branch of your nervous system that links up with the parts of your brain that are conscious. And the autonomic nervous system, or ANS, is the visceral motor system, and it conducts impulses from your central nervous system, but specifically to things like cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands around your body. And what's interesting is that this is kind of one of the key regulators of homeostasis or internal balance because it goes to most organ systems. Now we can divide the ANS into two key categories. We have sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We think of the sympathetic nervous system as being like the fight-flight response. So if you're just scared or frightened or alerted and excited in some way, you're typically going to be more sympathetically active because this branch of your ANS is more active and it mobilizes your body's systems during this activity, so it's going to promote the appropriate response by your organs. The parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite. Think of this as like the rest and digest. It's more involved with conservation of energy, and it promotes housekeeping functions like energy storage and digestion. So it makes sense how the parasympathetic nervous system, opposes the sympathetic. But you need both divisions to help regulate homeostasis because each of these divisions has a role on the same organs. For instance, your heart is connected to both the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So your sympathetic nervous system would speed your heart rate up, whereas your parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest, would actually slow your heart rate down. Your organs are in this dynamic balance between the two branches of your ANS. However, it's under unconscious control.